Floss presents the complete and alarming history of America's greatest garage band, the Stools.
For the Stools, I think it was very clear that they were America's garage band from their very first album in 1956.
Good morning, daylight. Come on and crack it down. Good morning, little birdies. We sing good morning with a song.
The greatest debut albums of all times: Hendrix, Are You Experienced? REM's Murmur, Elvis Costello, My Aim Is True.
J Squirrel, good morning. Bowinkle Moose. Now let the day begin. Good morning.
The Beatles' first album, in England, not the American pressing, Terence Trent D'Arby, Seals. There were just some debut albums that knock it out of the park and set the tone for the rest of their career. I would rate the Stools' debut album, Draconian Measures, that way. Also the Cars' first album, great album.
Big mattress. Good morning to my cover. Good morning.
They had a number of singles before the album came out.
To my lover. I'll probably never see you again. Good morning.
The Stools were not a one-hit wonder, for sure.
You won't remember my name.
One-hit wonders in the 50s? Well, you have the Channels, Nappy Brown, the Penguins.
Giselle McKenzie, The Charms.
Joan Weber and Sonny Gale, both one-hit wonders with the same song, Let Me Go Lover.
The 16s, the Four Freshmen, the Five Blobs, the Kirby Stone Four, the Mark IV, the Five Keys, Three Friends and a Stranger.
Jim Backus, Kit Carson, Ivory Joe Hunter.
Ronald and Ruby, the Turbans, the Jive Bombers.
The Cheers, that was a one-hit wonder. Black denim trousers and motorcycle boots, and then poof, they disappear. All except for Bert Convy. He did okay for himself. He was a sweet kid.
In the early days of rock and roll, it would be commonplace for white artists to have big pop hits with cover versions of the black R&B songs of the day.
Well, the McGuire sisters, Perry Como, the Crew Cuts, they all dipped into the well to sanitize the sound. But probably the singer that benefited the most from doing this was Charles Pat Boone. Watering down Fats Domino, the El Doritos, Big Joe Turner, Little Richard, and Ivory Joe Hunter, among others.
All told, Pat Boone recorded 60 singles. 6 of them became #1.
People always point to Pat Boone because he's an easy target. But do you think he really wanted to cover those songs? He looked so uncomfortable doing it. But if you listen to the Crew Cuts doing Shaboom, they own that song. And they're Canadian. It doesn't get any whiter than that.
The Stools tried to get the white acts to rip them off, but they couldn't. The establishment wouldn't have it. We tried.
Well, the reason may well have been that the band's management, Al Floss, had tied up all the publishing rights. And the real money wasn't in recording the song, but stealing the publishing rights.
Smiley Lewis had his career snatched away by Gale Storm. First, Fats Domino waters down Smiley's sound and takes it mainstream. Then Gale Storm comes in and whitewashes his I Hear You Knockin' and rides it all the way to the top of the charts. Nobody remembers Smiley Lewis anymore except maybe those hipster beard farmers in Treme.
Arthur Big Boy Crudup was one of these early pioneers, and he got eaten up by the big white machine.
In 1941, Arthur Big Boy Crudup left the fields of the South for Chicago on a recording contract at MCA. Over the next 15 years, he would release 80 sides, including That's All Right Mama, My Baby Left Me, and Mean Old Frisco Blues. Cover versions by Elvis, Elton John, Creedence Clearwater Revival, Rod Stewart, and countless others brought Delta blues singers' music to the masses. But by the late 50s, he'd quit the music business because he wasn't making a living.
In 1968, Elvin Anderson of the Stools, among others, tried to help Crudup and his family get his back royalties that he was owed from Hill and Range Publishing. After a 2-year fight, they ended up getting about $60,000.
So Anderson drove Crudup and 4 of his children from their shack in Virginia to the Hill and Range offices in New York City to pick up their long overdue check. When they arrived eventually, they were greeted by John Clark. He's an attorney for the music publishers who informed them that Hill and Range Songs had decided that $60,000 was way more they would have to pay if they had lost a lawsuit over the songs. So they're not going to pay him anything at all.
Penniless, Crudup had no other choice but to leave the building feeling defeated and deflated. Went out to the car where Elvin was waiting for him, told Elvin what happened. Elvin got so upset. He stormed into that Hill and Range office, went up to John Clark's face and said, "Don't you know who I am?" To which John Clark said, "No." Elvin said, "Good," and kicked him right in the groin.
Arthur Big Boy Crudup never did receive any of his royalties, and he died destitute 4 years later. Howsomever, as a small consolation, the attorney John Clark pissed blood for the rest of his life.
The Stools went on to record the song Zoom in Arthur Crudup's honor.
Black man's picking on a rig guitar, white man's chomping on a big cigar. Black man says, "Hey, nice car, jump on in, it'll take you far." Zoom. There's lots of room. Don't bother reading what the paper says, none like it's gonna be a pop quiz. Zoom. White man's playing.
It's important to note that it wasn't just middle-aged white men ripping off the black talent, although they did do more than their fair share. But up until 1971, Berry Gordy had a deal with Stevie Wonder where Stevie only got 2% of his royalties rather than the standard 50-50 split. Robbing him blind.
Now, Don Roby, Gatemouth Brown's old manager, owned Duke Records, which of course was Johnny Ace's label. Now, he couldn't sing, he couldn't write, he couldn't play a drum, a bass, no musical talent whatsoever. However, he's credited with writing over 1,200 songs by BMI. That's more than Slim Whitman and the Beatles combined.
I remember when Roby had a heart attack in 1975. It was a big surprise to everybody because nobody was sure that Roby had a heart.
Don Roby was evil, but he was a pretend gangster long before P. Diddy Combs was ever born. He wore a gun, and he let everyone know that he had a gun, but he never used it. At least Phil Spector shot somebody. Granted, it was a Denny's waitress, but Phil Spector was way more gangster than Don Roby ever was.
In 1954, a young nightclub dancer named Margarita Annie Johnson was working at the Purple Onion in San Francisco, but not having much success, even though she had trained with both Pearl Primus and Alvin Ailey.
All that was about to change when Marguerite Johnson changed her name to the more exotic Maya Angelou, and her singing and dancing career took off.
In 1957, she recorded the album Miss Calypso based on the popularity of her nightclub act.
The Stools sax player, Antonio Moretti, was a big Maya Angelou fan. So Elvin Anderson returned to his doo-wop roots with the fabulous hit, Maya.
Maya.
Maya Angelou would soon leave the nightclub life and Antonio Moretti behind and went on to become the sweetheart of the literati with her poems and autobiographies. The Stools song Maya would find new popularity in the 60s when depressed college girls all across America discovered Maya's writings and Stools' new music.
Maya Angelou, Maya Angelou, Maya Angelou, Maya Angelou, Maya Angelou, Maya Angelou.
Now, back in 1955, record sales were flat. So RCA Victor, in an attempt to boost sales, came up with Operation TNT, in which they dropped the price of an LP from $5.95 to less than $4, and 45s were slashed from $1 down to 89 cents.
Well, all the record companies lined up and cut their prices along with RCA, except for the Stools label, Dutchco Records. They actually raised their prices by 50 cents.
If the other labels were cutting prices, we figured the kids would have extra money to spend on the Stools. Hal, that single we were working in 1955, Beats the Hell Out of Me, would have sold at twice the price.
Leanne beats the hell out of me. Leanne, we just can't agree. Leanne, she beats the hell out of me.
Oh yeah, Beats the Hell Out of Me was a great single. Great story. Boy meets girl, girl beats boy. It sold so well, Al Floss asked the Stools to record their first album.
Of course, the demands of touring, press junkets, overexcited teenage girls, and the lack of writing forced the Stools to shelf cutting an album for a year.
In early 1955, Ellis Bates, a trombone player and sometime guitarist who had been playing on the street corners of Chicago's South Side, was returning home to Macomb, Mississippi for a visit when he ran into Elvin Anderson and the rest of the Stools. He briefly joined the band for a couple of Roadhouse gigs, and they tried to work out a couple of Ellis's songs in the studio for their new album.
Howsoever, the band had a problem with the driving five-accent clave rhythm that Bates had grown fond of. Frustrated, Ellis Bates returned to Chicago and quickly found fame with new bandmates, Billy Boy Arnold, Clifton James, and Roosevelt Jackson at Chess Records.
The story goes that as he was leaving the Stools, he asked Anderson what he thought of Bates's song, I'm a Man, which is really just a copying of Muddy Waters' Hoochie Coochie Man. And Anderson responded that he didn't think that the song or Bates would amount to diddly squat, and hence Bo Diddley was born.
The Stools took their failed attempt at the Bo Diddley rhythm and turned it into their song, Butter Side Down.
Take it played and pass it around. Don't let it last, butter side down. Make up a face just like a clown. Don't let it last, butter side down. He was a man of no renown. Don't let it last, butter side down. The girl got turned upside down. Don't let it last, butter side down.
Rock and roll lyrics have always been stupid, let's face it. It's part of the appeal.
But obviously, stupid isn't the only factor. Take Rock Around the Clock, not exactly rocket science, but it was supposed to be the B-side of the single. The song Bill Haley thought was the hit, or the A-side, was 13 Women, a song about an atomic bomb going off and leaving just one man and 13 women alive on Earth. That's not a song. That's the plot of a zany Fox sitcom. It makes the writings of the Stools seem like Shakespeare and Kit Marlowe.
Look at the music on the charts today. This is no exaggeration. This stuff was written at a second grade level. They did a study. Nickelback, Foo Fighters, Drake, Nicki Minaj. These songs, as great as they are, were written with the verbal dexterity of a 7-year-old.
Rock has always dumbed down. 10 years ago, it was written at the 5th grade level. If we continue on this pace, rock will become subverbal.
I think this might be the key to the Stools' music. While these subjects are often prurient, they're strung together with a certain level of skill that you just don't find from other artists. Elvis Costello, maybe. And I'm not talking about the pseudo-intellectualism of Sting. I'm talking more the vibe you get from the Smiths.
Backing up a little. On January 5th, 1955, Laverne Baker's Tweedledee entered the R&B charts. It would later peak at number 4 and become the first of Baker's 13 top 20 hits.
A little-known chapter in Laverne Baker's history was when the Stools were her backing band during a residency in Boston when she was still known as Little Miss Sharecropper.
I think Miss Baker was really happy with being with the Stools, but as things happen, Todd Rhodes came along and stole her for his band, Todd Rhodes and his Toddlers. Heartbroken over the loss of Miss Baker, Elvin Anderson then went on to write the Stools' most touching song, I Don't Love My Wife Anymore, in her honor.
I don't love my wife anymore. I don't love my wife any less. I love watching her in the morning on. Anytime her hair's still a mess, sitting there on a noseless head while she's in the bathroom getting dressed. It's just a little and Randiness.
It isn't known whether Anderson and Baker were ever married, but when Laverne Baker died in 1997, she was interred in an unmarked grave in upstate New York. The Stools did a lot of benefit concerts to raise money for a proper headstone, but for some reason they never bought one.
These things take time and planning and an awful lot of money. You can't just plop down a headstone and say, there.
Well, there might be another reason. February 26, 1955, Laverne Baker appealed to Congress in a letter to Michigan Representative Charles Diggs Jr. to revise the Copyright Act of 1909 so recording artists could be protected against note-for-note copying of already recorded R&B tunes and arrangements by white artists and arrangers. Al Floss complained to Diggs that Baker's letter is a note-for-note copy of a letter that he had written, and that Diggs and his buddies in Congress should just let the matter drop and to teach that uppity so-and-so a lesson.
A local group of historians finally gave Miss Baker a headstone, May 24th, 2008.
Now, in the early days of rock and roll, one of the less subtle forms of payola, which is the trading of goods or services by a record company for airplay, was DJs cutting their own albums when they had no business cutting records.
Oh yeah, payola. And one of the biggest jerks was Nick Charles at KXOX. Now he would extort the recording and release of his own singles for Memphis' Satellite and Stax Records. He even tried it with Dutchco.
Nick Charles came into our office to shake us down. He was only an overnight DJ, but that's when the kids were listening. And at night, the AM signal went all over the country, and you had to keep the creeps happy.
He attempted to run this game on Dutchco Records and the Stools. Al Floss's solution was to put Nick Charles in the studio with the band and have Elvin Anderson down the hall in an isolation booth supply the vocals.
Either Charles was incredibly stupid or very gullible, or probably both. After all, he was an overnight radio disc jockey. But to his dying day in 1993, he believed that he was the one singing on the Stools song, That's the Mutt's Nuts.
Used to know a girl who sang the blues, 'cause her mother made her wear her sister's hand-me-down shoes. Then she realized how they helped her strut. Now she's walking around like that's the Mutt's Nuts.
Believing he was hearing his own voice, Nick Charles relentlessly played the song every night on KXOX, but it failed to catch on with the kids. Perhaps because Charles would somehow neglect to mention that it was the Stools playing on the track.
Cosmo Ditmar used the break from the band in November 1955 to make a road trip to New York. At this point, the Stools were essentially two bands. One, Alvin, Cosmo, and Antonio, that would play country fairs, bars, and clubs. The other was Alvin and whomever was handy to record in the studios. I don't think Cosmo and Antonio had much interest in the studio at this point.
So Cosmo heads to New York to visit his old friends Laverne Baker and Bo Diddley. They were going to be on Ed Sullivan's first TV show, Toast of the Town.
In 1955, Ed Sullivan wasn't hip enough to book Bo Diddley or Baker, but he was smart enough to hire WWRL disc jockey Tommy Dr. Jive Smalls to find out what music the kids would like. But Smalls had been doing some shows at the Apollo, so he really had his finger on the pulse of what the kids liked.
The story goes that Sullivan really wanted Ford on his show because Tennessee Ernie Ford's song 16 Tons was a huge hit at that time. Smalls saw Cosmo backstage with a guitar and thought, ah, a white guy with a guitar. Who would know the difference? Certainly not Ed Sullivan, who was pounding back about 2 bottles of Bushmill before every TV show.
So Cosmo says, sure, I can sing the song. Problem is, he doesn't know how to sing it, he doesn't know how to play it. Some of the guys from the orchestra teach him, how to get going with it. And actually, Smalls wrote the lyrics down on cue cards so we could get it right.
The problem is, Cosmo was illiterate, couldn't read the cue cards. So when it came time to do the number, Cosmo panics and breaks into one of his old Del Sharif's songs. Is this thing on?
That was the last time Cosmo was allowed on the Sullivan Show. I can tell you that.
So Smalls turns to Bo Diddley and asks him to do the song instead. Bo Diddley says sure, then goes out on stage and does his own song, Bo Diddley, and blows off Smalls completely.
That was the last time Bo Diddley was on the Sullivan Show, too.
The Stools kicked off February of 1956 with a huge break. They got booked into the Rock and Roll Ice Review at the Roxy Theater of New York. It was the hottest show on ice, and by all accounts, everything went well, aside from Cosmo Ditmar's constant checking of a young Connie Francis into the boards.
Around this time, Atlantic Records signed the Coasters to a contract and rushed to release their new single, Down in Mexico, written by their new songwriters Lieber and Stoller. Al Floss responded by trying to release quickly the Stools' new song, Up in America, which was branded racist and offensive even by 1956 standards, and the song was quickly deleted.
On March 5th, 1955, Elvis Presley made his television debut on the regionally telecast The Louisiana Hayride. Over the years, the show would host a veritable who's who of talent.
But never once did they extend the offer to the Stools, which might have been fallout from the time that Bobby Lee Trammell's pants came off during the show.
While Elvis was burning up the airwaves, BMI, the world's largest music publisher, was working to tighten control of the objectionable lyrics by the supposedly dirty R&B acts.
In fact, BMI never gave clearance to dozens of rock and roll songs, including Shake, Rattle, and Roll, which went on to become a big hit for Big Joe Turner and even Elvis Presley himself.
The Stools' response to BMI was to release the song Grown Ass Man.
I'm not sure what it is you think you thought that you had witnessed, and I'm not sure what I do when I'm drunk is any of my business. Say good morning to a good afternoon, up with the black and tan. Every joke I tell is way too soon for a grown ass man. BMI Dutchco cleared Grown Ass Man with no problem and never really bothered with the Stools' music over their long career. And we'll continue to look at the beginnings of that long career and their debut album Draconian Measures next time, when the complete and alarming history of America's greatest garage band, the Stools, continues. Join us, won't you?
Could you try to see in my way? The truth is one option, an option I'd rather not use. If you don't mind, I'll just watch the news. See the news.